Okay.
before I call.
Sounds good. Well, thanks everybody for coming. We've had a whirlwind couple of hours of coming up with some ideas and thoughts and observations on kind of what you've got going on here and some thoughts on moving forward to kind of streamline things. So we'll go ahead and launch into it.
That button.
All right. Wow, that's fancy. So, presentation today is a basic overview of the strategic communications. So, our last visit was really looking into how do you communicate with different audiences in the overall community. We'll talk a little bit about visual communications as far as some of the branding recommendations that we've got, as well as some action steps of new things to undertake. So I do know we've got some new folks in the room. So Stacy, how do you want us to give like a 2-minute overview of the whole process?
Yes, fine.
Okay. So my name's Matt Ashby. I'm a consultant with Ayers Associates, and we were brought in through a grant with the Hubcap program to basically assist with strategic redevelopment planning and branding for Richwood, and kind of helping you be able to communicate the good things that are going on here in the community as far as redevelopment goes. And so, like I said, we've had 2 visits. This is our second. The first one was just with me talking and kind of getting a sense of the community, better idea of some of the things that you've got going on. And this one has really been more on being able to communicate the visual components of the excitement of the redevelopment that's occurring, and kind of setting a stage for some future actions. So, is that in a nutshell enough? Okay, sounds good. So, wanted to talk a little bit about the 5 audiences of Richwood. Now, these groups are fairly common groups across America that most communities have some level of these different entities within their community. So donors are folks that are either sponsoring events or making donations. They could be granting agencies, which obviously you guys work with grants quite a bit. Owners are business owners, building owners, property owners, developers typically. The public are customers, citizens, tourists, event goers. So kind of that general catch-all. Volunteers are, well, people like yourselves that volunteer and get involved in the things that are going on around town. And then the government, so traditional entities like that, chambers, visitors bureaus, things that have kind of a formal organization component to them. So the different audiences have different motivations, and I think when you're communicating with them, you want to make sure that you're telling a story that really connects with something that they care about. And so by tailoring the stories that you're telling about Richwood, you can start to have more effect when you deliver a message. So for donors, they want to see value in their investment. They want to know that the dollars that they've spent have been put to use wisely, and that something has come out of that activity. So this will be important in your grant reporting to deliver a positive product and some action results. For owners, business owners want really to be acknowledged and supported that they're taking a risk. Folks that are willing to sink their own personal funds and open up businesses need to be applauded, and it's not something to take lightly. And so acknowledging that risk and letting folks know that we're supportive of their activities is critical. The public in communicating wants to know what the inside scoop is. And I think in a small community like this in particular, you have a great opportunity to start to shape that gossip chain of things that people are talking about. And so by launching what we call MainChangers stories, stories about things that are going on Main Street, you have the ability to start to shape that narrative in a positive way, rather than kind of letting things happen and folks start to gossip and tell stories that are on the negative side. So really making sure that you're kind of trying to control that message a little bit and getting people excited about the positive things happening in town. Volunteers want to know that they've spent their time well. We heard time and time again that the folks who are involved here don't want to just plan, they want to get things done and make sure that there's results from the time that they spend. And then finally, the government entities, be it city or county, are typically interested in sales tax, property tax. They're interested in that financial sustainability. And so if you're able to demonstrate that you're generating new businesses and supporting new businesses, that's generally a positive thing. So in talking about the MainChangers, these are really storylines that document success. And so certainly the Whistle Punk is a recipe for reinvigoration. There's been a number of articles already generated about the property and the project and what it's doing for the community. But what we wanted to do was to use these different 5 audiences to give you a recipe for basically creating storylines that document success. So being sure that you highlight a couple of those different elements in each of these stories to be able to demonstrate the value of the investment that's being made. So by teaching the art of storytelling, you can start to get an understanding of how to tell the stories in your own community in a way that makes other people want to grasp and latch on and pass along those stories to their friends. So really making sure that it's gossip worthy. So this is more of a capacity building tool more than anything, is to not say that, well, we've got these ideas for you, but it's to be able to say, here's how you use those good storylines. Richwood Scientific is another example of a storyline that has been pretty widely promoted. And again, it's basically taking that model and figuring out, okay, what are the other storylines in our community that we need to be aware of and kind of moving through to make sure that people are talking about positive things within the community. And then ramping up success, we think, is another storyline that's emerging from your efforts with the Mondreas building. And we're excited to kind of maybe give you a little bit different perspective on kind of the approach to that building, because we think it's a great example of how economic development can happen in Richwood. So the Heritage Center concept, we think, is actually a brilliant way of bringing attention to vacant space or a new space that can be occupied. And the twist that we see as maybe being a recommendation is the idea that having it as a pop-up that basically highlights new spaces that are becoming available gives you the opportunity to attract the community into those spaces to essentially set off the community buzz about, oh, hey, did you see that new space that's available? And also to get people in that building that might be potential business owners to kind of be walking around and looking at the space as they're observing the museum artifacts and the displays.
Yeah,
exhibits.
it's a really interesting dynamic that I've never come across, but I think that it's brilliant. This idea of communities go through and they develop vacancy treatments, ways to make vacant properties feel less vacant. And then they also set up pop-up programs that expose people to the space and activate the space temporarily. You have a collection, you have available properties, but instead of thinking about a permanent home, think about that collection as a catalyst to drive exposure and investment in those properties. And it could literally become, it's almost like 2 strategies in one. This pop-up heritage center becomes an exposure tool. So it might be that down the road, a private sector property owner says, hey, now that you've filled up those spaces, I was wondering if you might bring the Heritage Center to my empty building. And it becomes a really nice way to kind of drive interest and exposure. So it's out of the box, it's different, but I think it's a really great way to take the things that you've done and just keep pushing them forward.
So that kind of changes a little bit the idea that I think we walked in with of considering the Mondreas building as a permanent incubator. We were talking about the idea that as you're having support models and businesses go into those buildings, does it make sense to spin them out to other places in the community when they've already kind of established a home within a building within that they've worked to help renovate and things like that. So the idea that we thought of pitching was that you would then transfer the incubator function to new buildings and basically have that as the model that you're renovating new buildings after you've set up the businesses within the one. So the incubator function transfers as opposed to the individual businesses transferring. And so what that does is that sets up this idea of RampUp Richwood that is your incubator recipe for model redevelopment.
And I think it's worth spending a little bit of time on because everybody, I think you hear incubator and you automatically understand what that kind of means, but I think it's become a little bit hazy. One of the best things and one of the intended purposes for an incubator on a retail side is to create a bit of a curtain. And behind that curtain, failures can die quietly and successes can thrive with minimal risk and debt. So I think one of the things that happens is you do all this work to create an incubator space, and then you end up putting up barriers to entry when in fact the beautiful thing about an incubator is it has the lowest possible barriers to entry. But you use the incubator as the shield so that when a business fails, the market doesn't get blamed. So the entire personality of an incubator is not only about springboard successes, but it's a dignified place to die. And I know that sounds really weird, but I mean, creativity is born out of failure, and an overwhelming percentage of new retail businesses end up failing. But if you can put it behind a shield where the failure occurs in the context of an incubator instead of in the context of, oh, well, I told you that wouldn't work in Richwood, then now all of a sudden you've created a safe place to be creative. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So you've got, it's one of those things where it's like you've done all the hard work. You've got all the hard work done, and now it's really a programmatic approach to it. But the thing that we really like is we like the idea of using this cluster of multiple properties right alongside each other to begin to create retail density. And retail density is our goal. We want to have enough retail that the retail motivates the consumer to shop and buy. And that means a couple more restaurants, and it means a couple more retailers, and then you create this experience where people can shop and stay. And my goal, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm always a fan of getting as many properties back on the tax rolls as possible, because that's what grows a community, is putting those things back in the tax rolls. So if you use RampUp Richwood as a cultivation program to put viable businesses into those spaces, and then it might be that what happens is the RampUp Richwood programs becomes a portable incubation program that either gets adopted by available property owners, or through acquisition and then sale of certain properties, RampUp actually begins to get a bit of a development corporation budget behind it. So you got a really dynamic future depending on what path you want to take. But I cannot applaud you enough. You've done the hard stuff. Mm-hmm. And now you get to take some of that in and take advantage of that cool factor.
So a couple of the things to highlight, the idea of no rent is really important for startups. but having some expectation that they spend a portion of their proceeds in marketing the business and marketing Richwood to be able to draw people to the community is kind of the in-kind service that they're providing in exchange for their rent. Eventually, you have the opportunity to step up rental rates or have some percentage share of revenue. But the idea being that eventually, if you've got a business that's stable enough in that space, that you can sell the building to those folks, and then you can reinvest those dollars in the next building while they kind of take care of and manage the current space that they're in. And with the fact that you've got 4 units within the current building, that person that buys that building then has an ownership interest with tenants built in. So you're kind of creating a model that can be transferred and grow over time. So.
And one of the things that I'm going to share with you all, it's a really valuable but also remarkably difficult set of data to get anything out of. But I did a retail leakage analysis of Richwood based off of a 15-minute drive time. I did 20. Because I felt like based off the markets that were around you, 20-minute was pretty fair. National chains typically will run a 10, 20, 30 or a 5, 10, 15, depending on the density of the area. Your overall retail market is really interesting. It's very stable. It's about as stable as I think I've ever seen. When I looked at restaurants, you literally spend what you make. There's, from an overall market, the restaurants in the area are selling about the same thing that the customers in the area are. It's a little odd. Typically, you're either seeing a place is pretty dramatically underserved by food, or a place is a food mecca. The nice thing is, with some of the new businesses that have entered the market, and how old are you guys?
9 months.
Okay, so you're not even showing up in the data. So you're going to start to kind of skew those things more towards a niching potential. But I say all that to say, there are only a very few categories that are sitting there saying, hey, we're leaking, we're hemorrhaging money here. So from a business plan perspective with new businesses in Richwood, there's this weird ingredient that doesn't show up on business plans, and it's called passion with a touch of insanity. And honestly, like you need people that are just a touch crazy, but really love Richwood. So I think that's one of the things that we really want to throw your way is, understand that it is always possible to break market trends. It's always possible to draw in new customers.
It kind of defines the nut house.
Does it? Yeah, yeah. We've come across quite a few people that are starting businesses that might be, passionate with just a touch, right? Stacy, Lisa. So, I think that's the thing. You don't need somebody coming in here talking about pro formas, and it's just not. That's not standard development. That's not standard retail startup. You guys are a different market. You need a dose of real passion to be able to create and craft their own market niche. And so if you can use that incubator project to help do that in any way, shape, or form, go for it, because it's not, your ingredients are different. Yeah. And just take advantage of it and let it work for you.
So this idea of having artisans front and center is really important. And I think it is that touch of creativity and that it's different than other places. This is the Base Camp Printing in Charleston, and the idea of having makers on Main and really showcasing what people are creating, that's what drives interest. And a lot of times these type of activities are relegated to the back of house. And the one that really caught my attention was Jeremy's print shop. Is in the back of Richwood Scientific, hidden away, and nobody can necessarily see it. But if you were to bring those presses out to the front, where they were in a storefront window and had people able to kind of engage and watch him in his craft. I think you generate a lot of interest, and it kind of starts that dialogue of, if somebody's walking by and they see you through the window, they feel like they can stop and watch, and there isn't necessarily that, oh, I have to start a conversation with this person, but you can just kind of observe what's going on, and then you start to generate this relationship with, oh, I saw this product being created, and it kind of draws you in. You want to take a piece of that home with you. And so really looking for those artisans to bring front and center. The screen print was one. As the coffee roaster gets up and running and needs a larger space, you might consider that being in a storefront as well. Not only from the fact that the smell wafting out onto the street is going to be amazing, but again, it's something that people, I think, are interested in seeing where these products come from and how they evolve. And the second thing that is an observation about the community is you have the Richwood Way, which we kind of explored the last time, of incubating the wholesale market. So the Cherry River Roasters was the key thing that struck me, because they've built brand awareness in the region before they have tried to launch the retail store. Which, if they tried it the other way around and basically tried to make the go of the coffee shop before they built the brand awareness and the cash flow coming in, they probably wouldn't be as successful as they are right now. So kind of looking for those ways to tap outside markets first before you tap the local market is certainly a recipe for success. So a few urban design items that we noted. Some signage guidance probably would be a great thing to explore, and we're going to give you some ideas on that. The concept of using blade signs that stick out perpendicular from the building, for the Mondreas building, I think is going to be really important to capture the attention of drivers as well as pedestrians on the sidewalk. And then the window signs are also an important thing to consider. You want to make sure that you're not blocking the entire view of the inside of the shop, because you want to have that customer interaction and that view into the store so that people understand, hey, here's something interesting that's going on. Other enhancements that we've explored are the ideas of street enhancements, looking at the stairways. Those are really good focal points, and you certainly could focus some beautification on those areas, as well as extension of creative crosswalk designs extending across Main Street. Again, it's to capture that drive-through traffic and say, hey, there's something worth stopping here for, and you've arrived in a place that is different than the rest of the context of the highway.
Yeah.
So
And
by crosswalk design, do you just mean like a
I'll show you.
crosswalk painted on the road? Okay.
I'll show you in a minute. Yeah. One of the things that I think it's always one of the values of bringing somebody from outside the community is for them to share the things that stuck out to them. And I've worked with communities all over the country. It is rare that you find a community that has the topographic change that you have in such a small space, but you slapped a rigid grid structure right in the side of the mountain. And it's so like when you sit there and you think about Main Street, I mean, you've got like upwards of almost 6 foot grade change on one side and then another 18 to 24 inches on the other. That's a unique dynamic that does not exist in a lot of places. A lot of people would call that a negative because it impedes the ability to just park right in front and walk right up or whatever. But just like Matt said, I mean, you've got a regional motorcycle tour that's launching, and they've branded it Stairway to Heaven How many places can you go and walk downtown and get a Stairmaster exercise? And like play it up because it's different. Those walls become interesting places to do murals. There's no reason that art can't exist there, even if it's not art, but it's just color. The extension of solid color from the wall down into the parallel parking spaces will help to shrink the roadway and will make the space feel more intimate and should in theory slow traffic. It's amazing what just a solid color, and I know how much fun DOT is to work with, but sometimes just spilling a can of paint by accident and seeing what they say goes a long way. We had a council member in a community in Vermont, and everybody in the community knew that they needed a crosswalk right in their downtown, but they kept saying VDOT won't let us, VDOT won't let us. So after the public meeting that night, the council member went and painted the crosswalk himself. And about 2 months later, VDOT came through. They were kind of like, why is this crosswalk so janky? So they repainted it and it looks good now. They didn't even realize, it's one of those things where it's like if you ask permission, they say no. But then when they see this janky crosswalk, they're like, it shouldn't look like that. It should look good. And they fix it. So, sometimes being able to kind of walk through and create those tactics, I think they go along.
Yeah, so we've highlighted a few options and we'll explore those here later. But the idea is that we wanted to give you ideas that you could roll into grant applications with and be able to say, hey, here's a proof of concept, we'd like to pursue this, and you've got a formalized document that says, hey, this is a good idea. Because those investors, those grantors, want to see that you've put some thought behind it in a community process before they put money towards it. So, it may be a terrible idea that you decide doesn't go anywhere from here, but if you want to pursue it, at least you've got it to be able to roll out to those grant agencies. There you go.
All right, so from here I get to show you some of the ideas that we came up with since last night, 8 o'clock, right? Or this morning. So one of the big things that I observed, obviously, as you go through the community, there's not a tremendous amount of consistency in any of your messaging or marketing. You have done a really good job of the consistent use of the color orange, and we all know why. Sadly, there's some potential liability to that moving forward because, we know that there's inherent pride connected to that in the high school, but we also don't know what the future of the school in this community is. And we could probably talk for the next 2 or 3 hours just about that. But the fact is that orange is an important color, but you need a broader palette. You need more colors than that to create connection. There is the consistency in that you have creatively tried to find different ways to incorporate lumber industry references, mining industry references, and ramps in a lot of things. And a lot of times that just is a picture of a ramp, a picture of an axe, and a picture of some mining implement. And that's a pretty standard response, and I completely understand that. But the big thing that we really wanted to do was we wanted to show you how you could land on a platform that was more simple, but that simple foundation allowed you to connect the dots. So the first thing we always like to start with is colors. We literally started with orange as that center foundation, and then we made a point to kind of work out from there. Now I will say the colors are a little bit more saturated on this screen. I made sure that the color blue and yellow that were in there are not the colors of your rival high school. So you always have to be mindful of that kind of stuff. So you've got a couple greens, a couple blues. The color palette makes sense. It's derived from those natural colors that would around kind of surround us. And honestly, as silly as it might seem, being able to have a consistent color palette goes a long way in connecting the dots, but also being able to have a strategy from where those colors came from. And if you look at these 7 colors, you really feel these kind of 6 natural colors that surround the orange that is Richwood. And we do that on purpose. So many of the stories that we're going to tell are going to be regional outdoor assets where we're positioning Richwood as a strategic base camp to experience those. So, at the very least, people might say, well, I don't really like that color blue. That's fine, but it was defined out of a strategic purpose, and you want to make sure that whatever you land on has some level of strategy to it. So then from there, you want to look at typefaces. You guys were consistent in that you were consistently inconsistent. You used something different every time, so you earned points for that. But it was kind of funny. We were meeting with the mayor earlier today, and I was like, I've literally worked with almost 600 communities. I can't think of another community that did not have their community's name in their city seal. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic where we're even understated in the one logo that we do have. So from there, we wanted to make sure that we selected some typefaces that we could use for consistency. Typically, I like to have a justification behind why I'm picking what I'm picking. With the primary typeface, I always look through several hundred options in your name. And I looked at Richwood in two ways. I looked at it in title style, so just the R capitalized, and I looked at it in all caps. Again, I know this is going to sound kind of design nerdy, but Richwood is a beautiful word. Your name is a beautiful name. That combination of 8 letters, the way that the letters compose and relate to one another is very, very attractive. So I wanted to have something that was solid, but it was still very attractive in your name. I didn't want it to be too flowery. I didn't want it to be too dainty. I wanted it to be solid. So I selected what's called a slab serif. And I think that one is called Sagano, and you'll see as it kind of comes together. The secondary typeface is a sans serif typeface. A lot of times they come off a little bit colder, a little bit more sterile, but they're designed to be content neutral. That means they don't carry any personality in to the equation. So they're really good at communicating things without having a lot of personality there. You all probably know Helvetica, the typeface Helvetica. Well, Helvetica is the logo for Bloomingdale's, the logo for Jeep, the logo for Crate and Barrel, the logo for used to be Walgreens. All these companies that are dramatically different all use the same content neutral because they wanted to put their own personality in. And then finally, I did kind of a hand-touched, handwritten accent typeface. These are very hard to read. They're hard to read, and I selected something that was hard to read on purpose. You will never see Richwood in this accent typeface. I want your name to be easy to read every single time, but you will find things like taglines and secondary image where you want somebody to stop, slow down, and dig into what you're saying. And that's why a typeface like this is really good. I think a lot of times people are like, well, we're pretty, so we need a pretty typeface. It needs to be a little smarter than that. So you're not going to see this on signage because it doesn't work well that way if you're driving by it, but it gives that opportunity to be a little bit more intimate. So then from there, I wanted to create an icon for you that was a little bit more contemporary. And I know a lot of times in my West Virginia communities, they're not really sure exactly. It's like, well, we don't want to look too polished. We don't want to look too corporate, but I wanted something that gave us the opportunity to talk about how we're proud to be in the mountains, how we've got these great rivers that surround us. Gave a very, very little kind of subtle storytelling line about the ramp, which I think is interesting, but wild leaks are kind of a weird thing to incorporate into your logo. So I wanted something that was just really easy to use, but I also wanted things to feel fresh and contemporary. If you look at what everybody else around us looks like, they all are in the mountains, so everything looks exactly alike. So I wanted to use these brighter colors to do something that was a little bit fresher. And I wanted to take that idea of the leak, and I read a lot about the flavor of a leak. A ramp. Why do you use a ramp? And why is a ramp not a leak? And why is it not a scallion? And read a lot about ramps. And it was interesting because they couldn't really describe the flavor. They could describe what it wasn't. And I liked that. And it really landed me on this very simple line of that unique mountain flavor. And it's this great way to talk about the ramp, but then also talk about the whole experience that which you would have. So when you tie all that together, it ends up looking like this. Okay? So again, when you first see it, your some of your gut reaction might be, that's not the Richwood I know. You know, that's never seen anything like that. But what I always like to do is I like to have an icon that can have multiple meanings. So when you look at this, some people might see the mountains. In it, you might see the rivers. With the way that the structure is, you can make this kind of connection to the way that those ramps look with those two leaves. This pointing up, this upward momentum. And then also this stylized W and V for West Virginia. So it's got all these different little storylines in a very, very simple icon. And it gives you that opportunity to go through with the way that you have the all caps. This secondary typeface has these different variations in it. You can have your different layouts. So you always have the right tool at the right time to say the right thing. But again, this is not a new city logo. This is really a tool that had never existed. This is a community brand. This is shared by our businesses. Anybody who wants to incorporate this can use it. Then from there, you start to look at those brand organizations. So you start with the city. Don't change the seal at all, but simply couple that seal with the typeface. And now all of a sudden, you have the gap that you need between the community identity and the formal government, but you still have that relevant connection that you need. Now, the next one was the chamber. I wanted to make sure that the chamber had a logo that really focused in on the power of networking, the power of personal connection. We talked a little bit about what chambers are for. I truly believe that chambers, especially rural chambers like yours, the focus that they have is on connecting people to one another to create the strongest possible business environment. So created something that looks like this very simple kind of idea of better together. Now, I understand there's this interesting thing that happens in the chamber world where we call it chamber diplomacy, where they start out being the Richwood Chamber of Commerce, and then they become the Richwood Area Chamber of Commerce, then the Greater Richwood Area Chamber of Commerce. They keep changing their name to try to make themselves more relevant and increase their members. I'm here to tell you, be relevant, don't change your name. That relevancy comes through the way that people see you, not how you've named yourself. So the other thing that I've come to learn about chambers of commerce is you have a formal name and then you have what everybody calls you. So I always create one that looks like this, and then I always create a variation that just says the chamber, because that's what everybody calls you. And so that might be what goes on your email signature. That might be what goes on your event, your invitation to a business after hours, where when you're doing something more formal for your banquet, you're using the formal logo. Now from there, we go to this facility and we go to the Conventions and Visitors Bureau, which CVB obviously is a standard industry-driven name, but we also know that Richwood's probably not hosting a tremendous convention scene these days. I wanted you to reposition this center as the Welcome Center. It's just a way of thinking about it. This is the place where you orient. And then I started to think, what can I use here in Richwood that allows us to tell this kind of cool story as it relates to welcome and orienting somebody to the community and spending time here. And so I came up with this, which I think is kind of cool. So you just use that clothespin, and then you talk about a little help hanging out. It's like, we're not going to hang you out to dry. You come here and we're going to make sure you know where to go. So it's just this really great way to use the same general parameters, but you can use different graphics. You can use different messaging as your different organizations go through and expand.
Ben, you want to hit on the Welcome Center language, not the visitor center, but
yeah, I think the big thing there is the just using that terminology of it being kind of this warm orientation point, where it could be visitor center and it wouldn't make a whole lot of difference, but you want to have an entity or a body that is actively thinking about hotel motel revenue. You want to have a group that is the voice of Richwood as it relates to Nicholas County hotel motel collection, and the way that you use that extremely large marketing budget that it generates of $67,000. But again, you know, but whether that is a defined committee of the chamber, whether I'm never one that likes to create a whole bunch of new groups, but there does need to be a group that is focused on hospitality and kind of the tourism orientation of the community. So then from there, you heard Matt throw out a bunch of ideas. So how do we take this brand foundation and then roll it out into some of those new initiatives and some of those new programs? So RampUp Richwood. So kind of positioning it as that startup community, tying it into this is the place where you can launch, where you can grow from. This next one I think is so cool, and I was talking with the mayor about it earlier today. Cold to code. And if you know anything about code, they're constantly doing brackets and slashes everywhere. So just turn that into a pick and call it a day. But again, having this initiative, you guys have already been doing it organically. Brand it and own it so the community truly starts to earn that equity around this idea of reprogramming the American coal miner. It's an awesome thing that you're doing. It's the kind of storyline that people want to hear about. And I think it's really cool what's going on here. The Heritage Center, you kind of repackaging that idea of the pop-up Heritage Center and the fact that you already kind of have that Richwood Heritage Center logo, but this kind of helps to drive that forward and connect it to the system. Something new that you haven't really been doing now, but if you want to cultivate this startup culture and you now have a place where you can get amazing beer in town, launch what we call Founders Ale, which this might happen once a month where folks get together over beer and literally just have a casual conversation about starting a business and create those peer cohorts amongst people that are a little bit crazy and thinking about starting their business. We heard Matt mention Makers on Main. So again, just kind of putting a graphic behind, and guess what? We can still get our axes in there. We can still get our log splits. I have a whole set of corresponding graphics that I'm going to give you guys that are everything from kind of pine cones to logging trucks even. And because I think those are the kind of things that people see when they're here. If you incorporate them into your messaging, they can now trust you. You know, it's like most people wouldn't think to incorporate a logging truck into their overall messaging, but hey, you know, you're going to see it when you're here. And to me, I think that was actually kind of cool because in doing some of the research, I heard all this stuff about the logging industry, and then I followed a logging truck all the way into town. It was an anti-logging truck, which made it a better thing though. So, and then we move finally into the brand extension. This is where it makes its way into the events. So, you know, Cherry River Festival, again, very simple. You can break out of that color palette when you get into the event extension, but you can see the typefaces make their way through. I'm even okay having, you know, your logo ramp, your happy ramp. Does he have a name? Rampy. Yeah, Rampy can't go away, right? So again, just using the color palette to create that connectivity, taking that Richwood Rising that's really started to grow some legs and carry that forward, and you can see just using those colors to kind of own the hashtag. And then once you set this kind of baseline standard for design and look and feel, then the hope is that then spins over into the private sector too. So Lisa was with us yesterday and talked a little bit about the business that she's thinking about, or that she's opening here, right? Yeah. Opening. So, you know, being able to take that and apply it to that. Now, this isn't the typeface. This is like, you don't want everybody using the exact same thing, but what you're doing is you're having the quality expectation increased so that the private sector is now amplifying that same quality. Matt talked a little bit about signage. There's this great program that we worked with in Valley Junction, Iowa, and it's through the National Sign Museum out of Ohio. The program's called CoSign, and literally what they did is they just went through and they did kind of a signage master plan for a community. And they got all the different businesses to participate, and they had sign designers from all over the country come in and design these great projecting signs. And they really create a unique feel in this district, and they literally had a little party every single time one of these signs went up. And you can see in real life, there's so much character that goes into it. And sadly, in a lot of communities, these aren't even allowed. They've written ordinances that keep projecting signs from being allowed. So, being able to have that stuff here is really, really good. But again, that's all private sector signage. So I wanted to show you an example of how the brand might make its way into a more comprehensive wayfinding system. This looks black, but it's actually green signs. This is being able to kind of go through and have a consistent sign approach. And these are designed to meet what's called the MUTCD. That's the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices. It is a truly stunning read for anyone who likes to punish themselves. I loaded the PDF on my iPad, and my iPad was like 7 pounds heavier afterwards. But what this really does is we like to kind of set the tone to not go overboard, especially with these. These are called Trailblazer signs. They need to have 3 or less, destinations on there. A lot of times people try to put too many. You want to have all your arrows aligned on the same direction so that the driver can quickly orient themselves to what they're looking at. So it just kind of sets that foundation for how you would apply the brand to a system and how it would fit into that MUTCD. So you don't have to do it this way, but this is just a really good example for you to use. Now, I incorporated a banner design, but I want you to know that you have a dynamic here where you want to think about your banners strategically. So Main Street and Oakford. Oakford is a really interesting dynamic because of how steep it is. You want to have something on Oakford that maybe helps you to really take in this kind of dramatic grade change. So where having a consistent banner all the way along Main will lower the ceiling, it'll allow the consistency to maybe bring people's visual cone away from the buildings. It actually makes a community seem more revitalized than it might be because they're focusing on kind of an inner stop instead of going all the way to the building facades. So this can be a really good strategy for something a little busier, where on Oakford you might want to go with more solid color planar banners that go in sequences. So maybe you do 2 oranges, 2 oranges, 2 blues, 2 blues. So as you're looking up it, you're seeing the colors change up the grade change. So it starts to use the banners to help you understand the topography of the community. If anybody's been to Mount Hope's downtown has a similar dynamic. It's not a topo change. It's this dramatic curvature in the middle of what actually seem like 2 different downtown districts. And what we did there was we designed a banner system with solid color, all blue on one side and all yellow on the other. So when you look down the street, you actually see the curvature and it draws you into the curve instead of feeling like everything stops and not moving any further. So then we talked about the crosswalks as well. Always take the things that exist in the public space and make them whimsical. Some of the best things that we can do are cheap or free. We love to talk about the $12 million streetscape project to reinforce the elevated sidewalks and do all this kind of stuff, but let's do the simple stuff. Let's do the stuff we can do tomorrow. So we were in one community where they took these little tactile strips and turned them into welcome mats. Crosswalks, you can do some amazing things. They put hopscotch in them, doing these what they call horizontal murals. So you can see all these different examples of different things that folks have done. And so what I did is I showed 2 examples here. I took your icon and I turned your icon into one. But in a community that has so many different connections with lumberjacks, we also did a plaid one. And I will tell you, I was telling Matt earlier, I was like, you know when you have an idea and you're like, that's a good idea, I'm sure somebody else has done it before, and then you Google it and you can't find any examples of it, and it's like, I wonder if anybody's done it before. You guys might be the first people that ever had plaid crosswalks. So that could be a kind of cool thing, you know? And then we were talking yesterday about rack cards, being able to have an easy way that the design can make its way into print materials, I think is really, really important. But then the other thing to always remember is just the power of vibrancy. The little things that add color and life to your community. So this might be, a lot of communities have started moving to what they call vibrancy grants. And they can be literally as low as $50, $50 to $500, and they're just out there to get color and life in the community. Chairs, benches, umbrellas, bistro tables, all these different examples. A lot of times we were so scared for so long that every time we did anything, if we're doing chairs or benches, we got to bolt those suckers down or somebody will steal them. Well, you know what? If they steal them, they need them more than we do. You know, it's like really, so having the ability to move things and cater them to the way that people want to experience them. This is a great example from Michigan where they had super narrow sidewalks, and people were like, well, you can't have outdoor dining on those sidewalks, they're too narrow. So they created this solution where yes, we can. So they literally had these tiny bistro tables coming out of the walls, side set seats, and angled mounted umbrellas. I mean, it's whimsy. You don't expect it to see it on that side street. Giant Jenga, checkers, cornhole, you know, all those kind of things. This is a cool little example where they created a farmer's market tent structure. And during the other 6 days a week, they turned it into what they call an Eno. Is it Eno? Is that the hammock? The Eno? And they call it an Eno hotel. But it's literally just like you can just go and chill in the hammocks, you know? So pull the hammocks up and have farmers come in on Saturdays, and then the rest of the time it's just a place to chill. And great little community in South Carolina where they had local artists create putt-putt holes. And they went, and the putt-putt holes were spread all throughout the town, so you kind of worked your way through to do it. But then once a year they did kind of it was during Masters weekend, because they're kind of close to Augusta, they brought all of them into one vacant lot and they had a golf tournament, a putt-putt golf tournament. So, you know, be creative and be fun. We get way too serious sometimes about doing this stuff, and we have to remember that the way that we create that passion for the people that are going to start the business is by reminding them why they love Richwood. So that's what I was able to do since yesterday. Your turn.
Awesome. So I want to leave you with a few action steps, things to look at. So the first one is shift. So working to shift the Heritage Center quickly so that a business can take over that space, because it is the best space. And I know that that's kind of hard to kind of let go of, but taking on that mantle of being the one that encourages people to come in and have a business and be able to be that cheerleader is so
We need that
critical.
one storefront.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to be there because we have the grant to finish the building next door, which is the
Okay.
storefront next door,
Yeah.
and that was the goal for both of those to be in that second one.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Both
getting
in the Heritage Center, but
getting that business in there is huge. Structure. Thinking about this idea of RampUp Richwood and figuring out kind of how to operate it on an ongoing basis. You know, what are the questions that need answered? How do we move this thing forward in a regular and predictable way? Third item is plant. So planting those storylines in the community, making sure that your people, your residents, can start to gossip about the good things in Richwood and really tell those stories. Envision the physical updates to Main Street. So thinking through what are those improvements that you want to make, and like Ben said, what are the ones that are easy? What can we do in the dead of night that the highway department doesn't have to approve, and kind of make it happen? And then the fifth one is launch, and basically making sure that, hey, let's go forward and really take into mind those things of getting the improvements done, because I think that's really what you all are about. It's not about the talking about it and the planning, it's about getting things done. So with that, I think that's everything.
Yep.
That makes sense.